Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 932A, and today's date is March 30th, 2016, and the title of the episode is 1 out of 3 Americans cannot afford food or rent. Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. I just uploaded an interview with James Rickards. You can go to YouTube, type in X22 Report Spotlight. It'll bring you right over to the video. Or you can come over to the x22report.com site. Just scroll down a little bit, look over to your right-hand side. You'll see the video there. Or you can go to newssentinel.com. That is the website where I'm streaming alternative news into one location. We're seeing videos. We're seeing news. All you need to do there is scroll down a little bit, look over to your right-hand side. You'll see the video, and you can watch it right there. Let's get right into the economic collapse financial news. As we continually look at each country, in Europe, Canada, Australia, the US, UK, we are starting to see a similar theme where each one of these areas are telling everyone that everything is fine, that the economies are going to be doing much, much better, maybe the end of this year, beginning of next year. And what's evident is that the economic indicators that we look at tell a completely different story from what the central banks are telling us, from what the governments are telling us. And if we look out in Europe, a survey from the European Union's executive arm showed that the economic confidence across the bloc fell in March for a third month running to a 13-month low. So, what is happening here? People are no longer believing. They don't believe what the central bank, what the governments are saying anymore. The European Commission said its economic sentiment indicator fell by 0.9% to 103.0 in March. That was a bigger fall than anticipated, and has reinforced worries about the economy throughout Europe. And it's not just Europe. Japan, which has been holding on for dear life, we see there is a 6.2% collapse in Japanese industrial production in February. And this is the most since 2011 when we had the tsunami there. And when we look at this, we see that industrial production is absolutely awful since 2011 going forward. In some cases, it's running longer than the Great Recession period. And when we look at these indicators every single day, we're starting to build a picture here. It's not about looking at one thing. We're looking at many different things each day and tracking them to see how they're doing. And when we go back in time, we see that these economic indicators are painting a story showing us that things are declining. They're deteriorating right now. They're not getting any better. Now, does that mean the government's going to say all of a sudden, hey, you know what? We're in a depression, everyone, and we kind of lied about everything. We manipulated these numbers. No. The government, the central bank, will never do that. They will lie until the very end. They will continue to lie on top of their lies. And they'll continually manipulate the economy. Actually, when we're going through the Great Recession of 2008, they really didn't want to admit it. They started pointing fingers everywhere else. But we know where the blame was. It was the big banks. It was the central bank. It was Wall Street. It's all the same right now. Nothing has improved. Now, ADP, they released their job numbers. And against expectations of about 195,000 gain, ADP reported 200,000 from a downwardly revised 205,000, which was 214,000 in February. Now, we know manufacturing is weak, and we know the service sector has been propping up the U.S. And how long can the service sector continually prop up the U.S.? Well, not that long, because we see the restaurant indicator showing us that things are completely falling apart. We know retail is falling apart. And when we look at the ISM services employment, that has been plummeting and declining. Now, as that continually plummets, ADP is trying to convince us that the service sector is continually adding jobs, while the ISM services employment is showing the opposite. And Mark Zandi is saying the economy is doing very well. Ignore GDP. We're telling you it's fine. Everything is fine. Now, what's very interesting is I've been looking back in reports, and every time ADP comes out with their report that everything is fine, it seems that companies lay off a lot of people during the same period. I don't know if this is done on purpose to convince everyone that everything is fine, and let's throw these numbers in here so no one really makes a big deal. But IBM, they're laying off 1,000 workers in Germany. Boeing is going to terminate between 4,000 and 4,500 workers. And State Street Corp is planning to lay off 7,000 people. The layoffs just keep on coming. And we can see at this point, if we are in this incredible recovery, why isn't business expanding? Why isn't retail expanding? We should see expansion all over the place, but we're seeing contraction. These are the facts. Now, during this recovery, we see that many of the people in the U.S. are having a problem getting by. And if we go back to 2004, we see the median income has fallen by 13%. But expenditures has increased by 14%. Pew finds that while all households had less slack in their budgets in 2014 than in 2004, lower income households went into the red by over $2,300. In other words, approximately 1/3 of Americans were no longer to cover their core necessities like food, housing, transportation with their average income. According to Pew, households spent more in 2014 than they did in 1996 after adjusting for inflation. The typical household saw its expenditures grow by more than 25%, from $29,400 in 1996 to $36,800 in 2014. Incomes have not kept up from 2004 to 2008. Median household income grew by only 1.5%, while median expenditures, increased by 11%. But perhaps worst of all is that the typical U.S. households in the center of the income distribution range, which is the true middle class, have seen their income, after meeting all expenses, plunge from $17,000 in real terms a decade ago to a paltry $6,000 as of 2014. That is a plunge of 65%. So it looks like we've been collapsing. It's getting harder and harder for people to make ends meet. And as more layoffs occur, guess what? People are not going to find those full-time, high-paying jobs. They're going to be finding part-time jobs. They're going to be falling off the market because there are no jobs out there. And this is going to get worse and worse as time goes on. Now, Bank of America, they've looked at the U.S. housing market, and they are saying that the housing market right now is overvalued, and they're very worried about the housing bubble popping. Now, analyst Ron Insana is saying that New York City's high-end housing bubble may burst sometime soon. He sees dangerous oversupply and slowing demand for New York City real estate market. And we can see at this point that things are starting to rip apart, start to crack, and things are starting to look a lot like 2007 going into 2008. And this is not a good sign at this point. This tells us that we're headed into an area where things are rapidly changing The economy is changing, and what I mean by changing, it's rearing its ugly head, where the government, where the Fed can't say, oh yeah, that doesn't really matter if housing is continually going down. They tried that back in 2008, where they said, yeah, housing's going down, but we've never seen it really drop off. Don't worry, it's going to spring back. And it didn't. It didn't do it in that year. They told us that everything was contained during 2008. Well, it wasn't. They said AIG would only need one bailout, but they didn't. So we can see right now things are really starting to fall apart. Things are starting to look a lot like 2008. The only problem is that things are much, much worse. And when this hits, it's going to be horrific. Now, the United States is warning about a global economic aftershock if the UK exits the European Union. U.S. Secretary of Treasury Jacob Lew, he is warning that if Britain exits the EU, it will have a negative impact in Britain, the European countries, the world economies, yes, and the U.S. So if the vote, I should say, is not fixed, and they vote to exit, they might blame this entire crash on the vote. And the vote is going to be held on June 23rd. Now, most of the time, we know that they try to fix this. They try to manipulate these numbers because the central bankers want what they want. And every time government, central bankers come out and say, listen, if you don't do it our way, it's going to be a complete disaster. Actually, they said this to Iceland. If you don't do it our way, and you put the bankers in jail, and you don't join the European Union, you don't borrow from a private Western central bank, your economy will not do well. It will crash. Well, actually, the opposite's happening. Iceland decided to throw their bankers in jail, decided to take control of the central bank. They're creating their own currency without interest. And we see at this point, they are thriving. This is why you don't hear about them in the news that much, because they don't want anyone looking at that model. And then you look at the model of the central bankers. We see all these countries in debt, and we see everything falling apart. So whenever they come out and tell us this, we know it's the opposite. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.